everyone, Spippiest Dude you know here again for another foray into a quasi-intellectual shitpost. Big shout out to the 12 people still watching these things. I love all of you. Today we're going to continue exploring the sexy gender debates with the complement to last week's video on toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. Check out my channel if you missed the last one. It'll provide a little bit of context. Now, in almost any social media post, video, or article on toxic masculinity that you can find, you will almost inevitably find a comment in the comment sections on these things, if they're enabled, asking something along the lines of, well, what about toxic femininity? You know, women can be toxic. And often you see that this question is lambasted as whataboutism, or, well, your team's just as bad, so don't wag your finger at me, kind of a tit-for-tat kind of reaction. However, I've decided to take the question seriously and look into the idea of toxic femininity and its theoretical foundations. And I found some interesting things when researching these two topics specifically. While digging into toxic masculinity, I was able to find a wide breadth of literature on both the perceptions and theoretical framework of the topic in the mainstream media outlets, alternative media, social media, and empirical and scientific journals. However, when looking into toxic femininity, I could only find two types of sources. The first type I'll call the, quote, feminism is toxic type sources, and the second I'll call the toxic femininity doesn't exist type of sources. And it's also really important to note that I could find absolutely no substantial empirical or peer-reviewed literature on the subject, with the exception of a small handful of articles that kind of center around feminism-focused toxicity found on social media. So I'm going to have a quick go at both these categories of sources, and then I'll delve into my analysis of the concept of toxic femininity. The feminism is toxic type sources appear to address a few different paradigms on female toxicity. In large part, they discuss how feminists or feminism are tearing down the structures of gender roles in society in a damaging or quote-unquote toxic way. And that this method of, quote, dismantling the patriarchy is seen to be detrimental to society, hateful and damaging to men and boys, and generally filled with rage. The more serious versions of this class of source that I've found kind of delve into how women behaving in more masculine ways is terribly undesirable for both evolutionary and social reasons, and it serves really only to herald the collapse of Western civilization. Now, something like that seems a bit alarmist to me, to be sure, but let's take a look at the second class of source, this toxic femininity doesn't exist class. And this type of source is typically a reaction to the reaction by feminist advocates and activists claiming that with all the real-world negativity caused by toxic masculinity, toxic femininity is a non-issue. Some sources go so far as to claim that women cannot be toxic in their gender role, but rather they're engaging in systemic forms of benevolent sexism, they're internalizing misogyny, they're perpetuating patriarchy, stuff like that. And so, overall, it basically claims that this is still kind of a form of sexism against women, or some kind of manifestation of toxic masculinity. And I'll be covering benevolent sexism and internalized misogyny in future sexy gender debates videos, so I'm not going to get too deep into those now. But I completely disagree with both of these types of sources. Like, I don't feel that radical feminists are representative of toxically feminine behaviors, but I also disagree that there's no such thing as toxic femininity. You know, if there's a toxic masculinity, then there should be a way to toxically implement feminine behaviors. You know, but that said, due to the breadth of literature on toxic masculinity, I was kind of able to start at the ideal as a foundation and deconstruct it to toxic behaviors, which I think is kind of a good way to do that. But I couldn't do the same with the feminine. So I had to start with observable social behaviors that I've observed and that I've heard other people talk about, and then work my way back to kind of the feminine ideal. So, bottom line is that if toxic masculinity is the attempt by an individual, or the attempt by social norms to achieve an idealized masculine gender role by means of mutating those characteristics of the ideal into something more extreme or something that's a little easier to attain. Like, for example, the, quote, protective leader becomes a controlling tyrant, or the idealized traits of, strong, dominant, assertive for men become violence, because it's easier to be violent than to be consistently strong, dominant, and assertive. Then I feel like toxic femininity should be created by means of similar mutations of the feminine ideal. So let's dig in. There's a woman out there somewhere, and she's got some kind of real sexy, sultry name, like Veronica. Right? And Veronica does it all. She has it all. She's beautiful in every possible way. She's intelligent. She's well-read. She can hold a conversation about anything and is genuinely interested in every word you say. Her curves and sway kind of make men go stupid around her. She's generally reserved in public, but she's fiery and passionate when it's warranted. She manages to kind of walk the fine line between classy and sexy without ever falling off of it, like it's just kind of her effortless, natural state. However, she doesn't brag about the effort that she puts in, nor does she deal with superficiality, like looks tend to not matter. She deeply cares for her friends and her loved ones and goes out of her way to care for them when necessary. She's the easiest person in the world to talk to and always manages to put you in a better mood by the end of the conversation. She's the type of woman who's in tune with her emotions and helps others tune into theirs, which also kind of helps with her ability to get people to work together. On the other hand, she's no pushover. She's strong and sets firm boundaries for the people with whom she interacts. And word is that she's engaged and wonderful and playful in the bedroom, not shying away from sex when it happens. But she's one of these women who just has really high standards for partners. So much so that only a couple of men have ever even made it that far. It just seems like other women just resent her, and men are just captivated by her at all times. Now, that's our friend Veronica, and to me, this is kind of what the feminine ideal looks like. So, let's go ahead and take a look at our list of gender binary traits that you would typically find in a gender studies course. And again, keeping in mind that I understand that people, humans, regardless of their sex or gender identity, possess combinations of all of these traits to varying degrees. And so for the masculine, we've got strong, dominant, aggressive, competitive, stoic. And for the feminine, we have the common counterpoints to the masculine. We've got delicate, subordinate, passive, cooperative, and emotional. So let's fuck right off with the masculine list altogether for this one. We'll focus on the feminine list. Now let's take a look at what we got. To me, this list of traits screams one word, and it's not feminine, it's weakness. However, most people that I know don't view the ideal woman as weak. So let's modify some of this shit. Keeping in mind that we have now kind of moved away from comparing feminine and masculine archetypes for the moment. So first, let's go ahead and leave the notion of women being physically delicate or fair where it is. Now, how about we change the trait subordinate to supportive? Like, women don't fill a subordinate role, they bear the responsibility of providing support within their social networks and their relationships. Let's change passive to subtle. The ideal feminine archetype is anything but passive. They're basically masters of social engineering, but it's subtle, it's not overt. We'll keep cooperative for those same reasons, and then we'll change emotional to passionate. And then we're going to add some shit. Let's throw in beautiful, nurturing, and chaste, which are common social characteristics applied to idealized women. And, beautiful typically refers to objective physical beauty, nurturing referring to the ability to care for and empathize with others, particularly with children, and chastity referring to the idea that a woman is ideally sexually reserved, right? You get kind of slut-shaming and stuff like that comes out of chastity. So I ask, does our lovely lady Veronica from earlier meet these standards? And to me, it seems like she's got most of it down. Alright, so here we have a comparison of idealized femininity versus something comparable to weakness, like a series of weak traits. So how do we make a relatively lazy attempt at the ideal? What types of behaviors will we get? And I'm not going to go into some real in-depth, real-world examples of toxic forms of femininity. They're relatively more subtle and variable than the toxically masculine straw man that I drew in the last video. So we're going to generalize a little bit more. But it appears that the first list, the weakness list that we made, has a good deal to offer in terms of the toxic versions of the ideal. You know, when you can combine traits like passive, cooperative, and subordinate in extremes, it's kind of easy to apply the label victim to this woman. You know, you might expect that this woman will be the one who stays in an abusive relationship for years and years, blaming herself for the abuse or buying into gaslighting from her partner. You know, if you shove together subordinate and emotional, then you could probably get codependent. You know, this woman who can't derive self-worth outside of her relationship, which I believe is more common in women than men. You know, you jump over to the other side, if we take beauty standards to the extreme, you get body negativity, body dysmorphia, and eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia. You know, these types of disorders are almost exclusive to women, almost, not quite, but almost, and can, you know, result in death by suicide, or, you know, fucking regular death by starvation, or, you know, whatever. Both equally death. It's pretty serious. Now, these types of behaviors largely affect the individual, but not so much the world around them. So, let's look at some other stuff. If you do emotional in extremes, you get histrionics, right? This would be that girl who breaks down into tears at almost any inconvenience. She doesn't handle stress or criticism well at all. She might even weaponize extreme emotional outbursts as kind of a form of emotional manipulation of others. You know, the nurturing role can mutate into controlling behavior from mothers. This kind of overprotective helicopter mom who won't let her kids do things that might involve physical or emotional risk. Or even further than that, one of these fucking hippies who won't vaccinate their kids. You know, these are kind of good examples of nurturing gone too far. You can tell that they kind of mean well, but it's damaging to their children. PSA, vaccinate your fucking offspring. Anyway, there are a few kind of generalized straw women that we can derive from these applications as well. One of the most extreme observable differences between the sexes is the idea that men tend to manipulate the physical world and women tend to manipulate the world in a social or relational way on average. So with women, if you kind of take the cooperative trait and you can mutate that into manipulative and then combine it with subtle to the extreme, you get this really interesting form of Machiavellianism that results in social engineering through emotional and psychological manipulation. In less severe circumstances, this would largely be your basic mean girl, right? Kind of nice to your face will stab you in the back type of person. But we'll discuss more serious applications in a second. Another social ideal that you have is the delicate or dainty or fair woman, which often results in women being perceived as victims and men as perpetrators. And in the real world, this is a false dichotomy, right? It's not always the case. Despite statistics or anything, you cannot have this dichotomy exist at all times. So with that in mind, we can look at your classic damsel in distress who takes the delicate trait way too far or sometimes can weaponize it. Right? In more benign cases, you might interact with a woman like this who never seems to be able to do anything for herself, constantly in need of help. If you combine it with certain other things, you know, this is the woman who can't do anything without a man, you know. This type of thing is unhealthy. But if you carry that into the Machiavellian cases, you might have those women who, you know, fucking stab their boyfriends during an argument and then call the cops, play the victim, and then have him arrested for the abuse. Or you might have these women who keep the children from their father out of spite while simultaneously draining 70% of his pay every month. Things like that, because they get to go in and they just get to pretend to be the victim, and it's just really easy for women to exist in that role and to basically say, he hurt me. Similar things occur for the trait idealizing chastity in women. I'm going to preface this section by noting that based on approximately a decade of independent research on human sexuality, as well as complete my honors thesis on the subject, it's abundantly clear that women in Western countries control sexual activity. Overall, women gatekeep sexual activity based on a socially prescribed sexual script. In other words, men ask, women get to say yes or no. And this is part of the reason that chastity is considered an idealized version of the feminine role. It's representative of purity and morality, as well as discipline. That said, the basic mean girl application of extreme chastity might be something like slut-shaming other girls, like I said earlier, to kind of make yourself look better. Or maybe using your sexuality as a tool to get a free dinner out of a guy by leading him on, You might let him think that something's going to happen, but in your head, really nothing's going to happen. But you get things for it. And then you can even go so far as to the Machiavellian application. You get someone a woman who weaponizes her sexuality in a more nefarious way. So think a woman who might say something like, if you do that, or if you don't do this, I'll tell them you raped me. So something like that weaponization of sexuality kind of stems from this ideal of chastity when it's been mutated or manipulated. Something like this might also apply to the idea that women cannot be rapists. I would argue that due to social pressures ascribed to men to take sex where they can get it and be happy about it, and other ideas kind of that men can't be raped, male rape by women, particularly with date rape, is likely one of the most underreported crimes that's committed in this country. And you can see this phenomenon pretty consistently when you get one of those super hot teachers in her 20s that fucks one of her 13-year-old male students. People rightly cry toxic masculinity at the comments sections where you get all those, lucky kid or I wish that happened to me comments. But they fail to address the fact that the woman barely faces any punishment typically in these situations. The article says she, quote, had sex with a student rather than groomed and raped a child, which is really what happened, and so on like that. This is toxic femininity on a social level, kind of a trivialization of something terrible that a woman has done because it's perceived as somehow less severe than if a man did it to a more vulnerable girl, and this type of thing occurs pretty frequently, but it just seems to be taken less seriously than if it's perpetrated by a man. And this carries back to the kind of victim narrative that women kind of aren't perpetrators, or they don't do things as harshly as men do. Now, you might be asking, hey, you ridiculously attractive disembodied voice. What about the whole man up or be a man thing? What about dismissing shit because boys will be boys? There's no equivalent for girls. Well, you beautiful space monkey, you're half right. The phrase, quote, act like a lady is very similar to man up when it comes to teaching children acceptable standards within their gender roles. Where man up typically translates to toughen up and don't be feminine, act like a lady effectively means kind of settle down and don't be masculine. Often the notion's read as be still, be silent, and take up less space. But it can also mean be respectful, be modest, and be aware of your social setting. The feminine gender role is expected to be proficient at observing, navigating, and engaging with the social space around them, traditionally in an effort to find a husband. Unfortunately, this type of social conditioning is a carryover from a time when women weren't expected to balance home-work life quite so seriously, which is why some women claim to have been scolded for, quote, letting daycares raise their kids, but others kind of catch shit for just sitting on their asses at home all day. It's kind of a matter of social perception where people don't know where to place someone in their role anymore. You kind of also get an interesting phenomenon that, from my experience, happens more to women than men. The when are you getting married or when are you having kids question. Women who say they don't want children or don't want to get married appear to catch a severe amount of shit from some of the more old school folks in their social networks. Kind of like they won't be complete without attachment to a spouse or shitting gremlins out their ass. I don't know. It's just something that I've noticed from time to time, and I have no idea if it's a gendered phenomenon on average. Because, my mom's asked me, when you giving me another grandbaby? It's like, well, you already got enough. Deal with it. But, I feel like women probably get this a lot more. Motherhood is kind of an idealized thing for women, it seems. As far as the feminine equivalent of boys will be boys, I'm less certain. I feel like the argument could be made that the acceptability of grand public emotional expression for women is one of those things that is routinely addressed with a, women, am I right? Type of attitude. People just kind of leave it be. They don't address it very often. They brush it off. You might also be able to say that the trivialization of crimes or morally bankrupt behavior perpetrated by women that I discussed in the hot teacher fuck student example is an equivalent. Third example might be the idea of social manipulation, competition, or the formation of hierarchies amongst girls could be an example of girls will be girls. But at any rate, is there anything we can do about this? Well, first and foremost, we cannot teach our daughters that it is normal to be victims. Women are not victims. They don't have to be either. We should not teach them that they should be these sort of fragile things that need protection. It's true that the idealized male fills a protector role, but the idealized female is absolutely not helpless. The idealized female is powerful and resourceful and intelligent and fierce. We can teach our daughters that standing up for themselves is just as important as reliance on others, and that sometimes sucking it up is better for you than crying it out. We can ensure that our daughters understand that a healthy body is an attractive body. Whatever healthy subjectively means for them. People have different builds. Some people are naturally slender, some people are naturally a little thicker. But whatever healthy is an attractive body. Physical attraction characteristics in women are health cues to observers. Therefore, you don't need to starve yourself to meet beauty standards. That said, extreme obesity can also cause health problems. So the bottom line is just be active and don't eat shit that'll fucking kill you. Beyond that, we can teach our daughters to be cooperative and not spiteful, deceitful, or manipulative. Teach them to be teammates, partners, and leaders, not shady, underhanded assholes who play bullshit mind games with people. Furthermore, we can teach our girls to sex it up right. Teach them that sex is not a tool or a weapon. It is a damn enjoyable thing to be shared with someone that you'll want to share it with. Teach them that they're in control of their sexual behavior and that the whole thing hinges on consent from everybody involved. And to drive the point home, teach them to use their fucking words when it comes to consent and sex. Shit don't gotta be weird. Sex ain't weird. Finally, we can ensure that our girls have positive female role models to teach them how to interact with the world. Women who can teach them how to achieve the kind of work-life balance that works for them. Women that can teach them that marriage and kids don't have to be your ultimate goal, and motherhood doesn't have to be your defining characteristic. But if they want those things, it's all good. We shouldn't force anything on anyone, certain narratives like to claim that men and masculinity are the problem in society. Men start wars, men shoot up schools, men abuse their partners, and so on and so forth. They like to argue that women are just innocent or oppressed bystanders before the terrifying, awesome, unchained power of masculinity. However, I believe that this narrative comes down to a simple matter of priority. And it really is just because men often interact with the world physically. They reach out and touch things. They do things. And therefore they're seen as a greater threat, where women are not seen as a threat at all. And the bottom line is that I feel that toxically feminine behaviors are just as damaging to both individuals themselves and others around them as toxically masculine behaviors. I'm not saying they're worse. This shit is not a competition, and people tend to forget that. But they're just different, and they're equally damaging. You know, there is this certain idea within, you know, certain feminist groups and then MRAs and things like that. This is turned into a battle. It is turned into a tit for tat, rather than looking at shit and basically being like, this side's got problems, women have problems, men have problems, and maybe we could work on these things. How do we do that? Instead, it's rather just, well, you do this, so it's all your fault. We have to stop doing that. Anyway, I kind of feel like I'm just screeching into the void at this point, so I'll close it down here. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked the video. No links again this time. There just wasn't enough information on the topic to kind of warrant citations, so all this came from my brain space. Don't forget to upvote, downvote, comment, subscribe, share this with everyone you know, and I will catch you beautiful animals in the next one.